I can tell my secret. My 5-year-old son just turned 5 yesterday, Braylon. He thinks I can do magic. The reason that he thinks that I can do magic is that I told him that I can do magic. It all started one night where I had some Cheerios, and I took one of them, and I put it between my hands, and I said, oh, abracadabra, and as I'm rubbing it, I just let it drop in my lap, and he doesn't notice it, and I'm like, poof, gone. And he's like, where'd it go? And then I just took a second Cheerio, right, because they all look the same. Or I just, as I'm talking about how I'm going to bring it back, and I'm doing my hands like this, and I'll, look around, where is it? And when I look around, it makes him look around, and I just pick it back up, and I'm like, it's in your ear, it's on your head, whatever. And his mind was blown. He giggled, to no end when I did that the first time. So then I took it to, the next level, and I just started planting Cheerios all around the house. And I was like, hey, Braylon, check this out. Abracadabra, make it disappear. And he's like, oh, what happened to it? I was like, it's communicating with me. It's in the ottoman. And he would run and open it up, and he's like, it's there, I can't believe it's there, over and over. And so, I would take it to these ridiculous degrees where I would tackle him and wrestle, because we wrestle a lot, and I would wrestle with him and kind of roll him over, and as I'm wrestling with him, I'd put one in his pocket. You wouldn't even know. So then I would make it disappear, and I'd say, wait, hold on, is it in your pocket? And he would check his pocket, freaks out. It's pretty easy to trick a 5-year-old, but it's less easy to trick adults, which is why when magicians and illusionists do that to us, we love it so much. It just helps suspend our belief, and it's just a really exciting thing to see someone do a disappearing act, take an object, make it disappear, and bring it back. Every good vanishing act has 3 parts, right? And if you've seen the movie Prestige, it talks about this. You have the pledge, which is when an object is presented to you. You have the turn, which is when it disappears, and the prestige, which is when it's brought back to you. It's not just enough to make something disappear. That's not super interesting. It can be, it's oh wow, he did a good trick. But it's only when it returns that it's special. And it's usually a little bit different, right? There's some kind of theatrics in the return. A magician takes a dove and makes it disappear, but then opens a box and 100 doves come out, right? It's a little bit different. It's something magical. It's different than when it first disappeared. It's that prestige, that revealing, that really captivates us. There's some magic words that are spoken, some kind of banter with the crowd. And everything is not quite what we thought it was. Everything's slightly off in the illusionist act. What I want to show today, remember, this is our Easter series, so we're talking about what resurrection means, what we can see when we look at resurrection. What I want to try to show today is that Christianity, in some ways, functions like a vanishing act. And the event of the death and resurrection serve to help us see Christianity in this way. For most people, and this was for most of my life, I felt this way, that being a Christian meant that you believed a certain set of dogma. There's boxes you can check off for doctrines. If you believed enough of them, you were in the club, and if you didn't, you were out. And for most people, Christianity functions this way. It's things you have to believe, mentally assent to, and then you're in the group. You could be outside of the group, you could be inside of the group, depending on what you believe. And whether a secular atheist or a Christian apologist is coming and looking at Christianity, they both think that way, right? It's one just doesn't like the beliefs. One just disagrees with the beliefs or thinks they're stupid. The other one likes the beliefs and thinks they're valuable. But they both agree that Christianity is a set of beliefs or dogma, or maybe a set of actions you take, something that defines you and puts you into a group. And of course, Christianity is a social movement. Obviously, if you're looking at it anthropologically, if you're a sociologist, sure, there's sets of markers. There's things that you can look at and be oh, that's, we can call that the movement of Christianity. But what I want to argue is that Christianity functions less as a system of beliefs and more a new way to exist in the world. And to understand that, I want to look at it like a disappearing act, like a vanishing act, like a magic trick. I think that in Christianity, we see an object before us that vanishes and is brought back again. But what is that object? What is the pledge? You know, as we've talked about before, we as humans can tend to set up, the biblical word is idols. Another word would be a sacred object that holds so much value for us, we think that if we can just achieve it or have some kind of connection to it, it'll bring us completeness, wholeness, healing. It'll make us better than what we were before. It'll give us something we never had that will make us happy, make us whole, make us complete. We see the story of Adam and Eve, of course. Like the fruit is the classic example of this sacred object. It took on a meaning much higher than just a piece of fruit, right? Adam and Eve saw that and knew that it could make them what they thought was more than they could have ever been before. Make them wise, make them knowledgeable. In other words, complete something in them that was missing. They thought if they could get that, something that was missing would be brought to them. But ultimately, we know that these sacred objects fail us. Whether it's a relationship, if I could just have a stronger marriage, if that person could love me back the way I love them, my life would be better. Whether it's a successful career, if I just made more money, or even if it's not about the money, I had a career that was fulfilling and everyone thought I did a good job at it. If I could just have that, I'd be complete or happy. Or maybe it's your religion. Maybe you view God as not a subjective, relational kind of existence, but maybe you view God as an object. That if this object can approve of you in some way, you'll be happy. Maybe it's eternally happy. Maybe it's heaven. Maybe it's happy on this earth. Maybe you want to cling to a God that gives you meaning and order when maybe you feel like your life's not meaningful or ordered. Whatever it is, we all tend to set up these sacred objects. And most of the time, they're not even real, right? Like a piece of fruit. Or an idol, an actual, like a stone, piece of stone carved into someone's face. But things that aren't even real can become real for us. Something that was not an idol can become an idol. And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians. The church in Corinth asked him, is it okay to eat meat that had been sacrificed to idols? Like, that was a question they had. Because for them, they're leaving paganism. For most of them, that meant some sort of Roman imperial cult. They're worshiping the local magistrate as a representative of Caesar, who's a representative of God. You know, they're worshiping these, like, levels of strata of God. And in these temples, you would sacrifice meat, some sort of animal, and then they would sell the meat in the market. And so they're asking Paul, does it show our allegiance, like, to Rome, to Caesar, to Zeus, to Aphrodite? Is it an act of allegiance to eat that meat? And Paul says his answer to this is, we know that an idol is nothing at all. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, for us, there's not. Only one. Jesus Christ. But not everyone possesses this knowledge, and some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God, and we are no worse if we do not eat, no better if we do. What we see in this is that a belief can function even when we're not realizing it does, right? This is a community of people who have embraced the idea that Jesus is Lord. They've embraced the idea that these gods mean nothing, but the belief still functions inside of them. This little piece of stone that is actually nothing in the world, Paul says, like it's nothing, it has no existence, is still making a demand on them because they think they're worshiping it when they eat the meat. So this is just an example of how we can do this too. We may say that our careers aren't everything to us. We may say that money's not everything to us. We may say Of course you can't find happiness in another person because people let you down. Of course you can't find joy in another person because people let you down. We all know that. We all know that. But those beliefs still function under the surface for us. And ultimately, we do seek out these sacred objects. So something that is nothing can become something to you, can become an idol, can become a sacred object. This happens in a lot of ways. But sticking with what Christianity shows us and what we see in Paul's explanation of the death and resurrection, it becomes a sacred object. A nothing can become a something through a prohibition. Paul tells us that sometimes we think we want something more, but something stands in our way. And for him, it was an experience of the divine. If you remember the temple in ancient Judaism, you had an outer court, an inner court, and then the holy place, the Holy of Holies. And this holy place is separated from the inner court by a curtain. And this idea is that the people of Israel are broken, they've broken covenant, they're sinful, right? They have sins, they have a broken condition. And only behind that curtain is their healing, wholeness, completeness, cosmic order, national security. All those things for them were tied together. Only behind that curtain can we find it. But we can't get in there because our broken condition separates us. And so you have the introduction of the law. Well, if it's our broken condition that separates us, then let's just stop being broken. That seems like a simple idea, right? And Paul uses the example of coveting. And he says, if I covet something, if I covet my neighbor's possessions, and I know that ultimately that doesn't bring me happiness and serves to cut me off from the divine experience, then the law says, well, don't covet. But the tricky thing about the law that Paul shows us is he says, when I hear the words, don't covet, I just covet even more. I can't not covet now that you've told me not to covet. It's like, don't think about a purple elephant, right? And in all your heads right now, John, I'm sorry, purple elephant. It's in his head now. That's how it works. The prohibition incites desire. And so we have Paul giving us this problem of the law. There's something we can get that we desire, or maybe we didn't desire it at all, but saying that we can't have it. You can't go into the Holy of Holies. Well, why not? It must be really good in there. There must be something I need in there. Nope, big heavy red curtain. Can't come in because you're broken. Well, then I'll try to not be broken. Oh no, now I'm even more broken than before because there's like levels upon levels of brokenness, right? This is the condition of humanity. And specifically, the condition Paul finds himself in, talking to new Jewish converts and pagan converts. But what's really awesome is that Paul shows us that this object that's set before us, whether it's behind the curtain, whether it's in the garden, whether it's in our own heads, has been banished, disappeared by Christ, the divine magician, who, when he's on the cross, dies, tears that veil away, like the classic, like a magician, and it's gone. There's nothing there. There's nothing behind the curtain. This is why Paul says that in the death of Christ, the law with all of its demands is nailed to the cross. Its power to enforce these cycles is gone. So you have the barrier keeping us away from what we thought would bring us forgiveness, completeness, wholeness. And when that barrier is gone, we realize, there's nothing actually hidden from us after all. The whole system of these cycles of desire and reaching for that thing that will give us what we thought we needed crumbles when Jesus is on the cross. He cries out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? The God behind the curtain who promised national order, who promised blessings, who should be protecting a Messiah. A Messiah shouldn't be killed. Paul tells us that anyone who's hung on a cross is cursed by God. There's no place for the crucifixion in any neat and tidy religious system. Jesus stands outside of that religious order that promised the order, the certainty, the forgiveness, the wholeness, the completeness. He stands outside of anything that made sense in that way of thinking. But like I said before with the Cheerio, it's not just a good trick if I can make a Cheerio disappear. I got to bring it back. I've got to have a prestige. And so Jesus gets rid of the sacred object, pulls away the curtain, gone, vanished. But what does he do to bring it back? If he had just died, right, and that was the end of the story, then we would say, oh yeah, well, Jesus just didn't fit in the categories, and he actually was cursed by God, I suppose. We better just keep following the law. We better just keep desiring the object that's always slightly out of reach for us. We'd better just keep following a God who's really nothing more than an idol. But in the final act, the part that we see testified to in the resurrection stories, we see that there's a return of the object. But this time, it's not the same kind of sacred object that promises us meaning and order. It's not a sense of holiness kept behind a curtain. It's not the idea that now I can go behind the curtain. There's no promise of certainty. Rather, we see God, to use Paul's phrase, who is becoming all in all. We experience not a better thing to desire, like here's a better object that you can just search after and never reach, but rather a way to exist in our world. A new way of thinking that releases us completely from those cycles. It's not a new identity, it's not a new tribe, it's not a new thing to believe, but rather a way to live even in the midst of our other identities. Which is why Paul says, have your identities, but live as if you are not those things. There is no male or female, Jew or Greek. This is what he's talking about. Obviously, there's still males and females and Jews and Greeks, and slaves and free people. But this way of Christianity undermines all of those because it's a way to exist, a new way to exist in life. In one way of living, we see that there's something that can make us better. A promise of more, a promise of forgiveness or completion, something that is missing within us that can be fulfilled. If we just do something the right way, we can fill what's missing. But Jesus actually shows us that system is the problem. On the other hand, we have Christianity, that rather than filling anything, takes away the demand altogether. This is why we call what happened on the cross the forgiveness of sin. Think about the fact that in Christianity today, there's a lot of language that, Jesus paid our debt. That's really not correct verbiage, because that is basically implying that, yes, the Holy of Holies is what we needed all along, and Jesus paid it, fulfilled the thing that's missing in us. No, it's forgiven in the sense, when a debt is forgiven, it's not paid off. That's called paying off a debt. When you are forgiven of something, it's just taken away completely. Its demand over you is no more. If I lend you money and I say, never mind, you don't owe me money anymore, that's forgiveness. If I lend you money and someone else pays it for you, I still had the debt over you. I still demanded it from you. In Jesus, we see that there is forgiveness. The entire demand the law makes, Paul says in Galatians, the very demand of the law over him is nailed to the cross. Not paid off, but there is no demand. It never even was there. It was a trick we told ourselves. The crucifixion of Jesus shows us that there's no debt. The law and its demands are nailed to the cross. The law or any other demand made over you from a sacred object is dead in the water. The crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus mark the experience of losing that obstacle, whether it's a law, whether it's some kind of desire for something that you have, that you think you need. It marks the experience of losing that obstacle that sustains our desire for the sacred object. It's not just a narrative that serves to reassure us and let us know that everything makes sense, but rather it's an event that signals the collapse of every system that grounds us. The cross is wisdom, Paul says, but anti-wisdom. A wisdom that's foolishness to the philosophical wisdom of the world, a stumbling block to religious wisdom of the world. It's an event that constantly, day after day, disrupts, ruptures what we thought we knew, and calls us into something new, something different, something outside of the cycles of desire that will never fulfill. So if the death and resurrection expose the bankruptcy of the old system, what does the new life look like? If I'm arguing that it's not a way you necessarily believe, obviously we all have beliefs, and we will all have beliefs, and that's perfectly fine and good. But if it's not that's the core of Christianity, but rather a way to exist, what is that way? What is that life? For Paul, the operative word is freedom. It is freedom. When we live in Christ, or connecting ourselves with this disappearing act he gave us, we live in this anti-wisdom of the cross. We're free to move through life without feeling the burden, the ever-burdening quest for things that will make us happy, for relationships that will make us happy. We are free to live outside of religious pursuits of the law or any other law-type substitute we can create. We are free to love. This is what Paul says life in the Spirit looks like. A life animated by something new. Not the flesh, which is shorthand for these endless pursuits of sacred object, but the Spirit. We no longer live under law, but live in spirit. In other words, we no longer live bound to the demands of any religious system, or any political system, or any family system. We no longer live by those demands. We live under the demand of the Spirit of Christ, which Paul shows us is not the same burdening demand, but is rather a call to leave the empty fantasy world of empty promises and to embrace a world whose primary ethic is love. So when the thought creeps into your head, I'm not worthy of love, or if I could just be better, then I would have more friends. Then I would be happier. Or I'm not good enough. If I was better, I'd have more success in my career. Something in my life is lacking that makes me unworthy. Paul says, you can't bring that charge against yourself. In fact, nobody can bring any charge against God's people. Nobody can make any demand on you. There is no demand that is bigger or more powerful than the freedom you have when you embrace crucifixion and resurrection. There's no ideology to which you belong that can keep you from embracing another person in love. There's no religious, racial, economic, gender, or any other identity, no power in heaven or in earth that can keep you from doing anything you want in love. Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ, Paul says. This is the freedom we find in the divine disappearing act of the crucifixion and the resurrection. And so now we're going to physically celebrate this act, this crucifixion, and everything that it means. It's interesting that the words hocus pocus, right? Those little funny words you say during magic tricks. Some people think that it actually came from the Roman Catholic observance of the Eucharist. Because the words, "this is my body," in Latin begin hoc est corpus. And some people think that through derivatives and, dirtying up the language, you get hocus pocus. Just a fun way for street magicians to make fun of what they saw the priest doing. But in a way, it kind of is like one of those disappearing acts. We take bread, we take juice, we make them disappear, we eat them. And what comes in its place? You are now the body of Christ. And so, over and over, we see this idea that the death of Jesus takes away something and brings us back something new and better and utterly different and outside of anything we thought before. On the night that Jesus was betrayed before his crucifixion, he took bread and he broke it and he said, "This is my body, hoc est corpus." It's broken for you. From now on, when you take this meal, take it remembering this. And then he took the juice and he said, the wine, and he said, "This is my blood." From now on, when you take it remembering that it's shed for the remission of sins, for moving away the whole system of law and sin. Because as often as we eat this and as often as we drink this, we show Christ's death. The death that gets rid of the old and brings in the utterly and surprisingly and rupturingly new again and again. So as the music plays, come forward, take the bread, take the wine, eat it, drink it in your seats, and then we'll sing one song together and be dismissed.